social engineering or little tips and tricks and things like that. What I'm going to talk about is how to actually plan, execute, and deliver a professional engagement. So I think you heard enough about who I am. I've done, I would say probably more social engineering. I've done more social engineering engagements than a lot of the people I know. It just doesn't really seem to be a very popular assessment phase, but I've been doing it for about 10 plus years. And so really what I wanted to do is share sort of how I execute with you. So the goals of a professional social engineering assessment is to be professional, and maybe that seems like it goes without saying, but it doesn't. You have to be very organized and methodical, and most importantly, you have to provide value to the company. This talk was kind of born from an experience I had with another consulting organization that had essentially just kind of thrown somebody on site and said, okay, drop a USB and, see what happens. And they got in and they got admin rights and they were like, woohoo. Well, consulting engagements or delivering professional services like that, there's a methodology and process to it, but most importantly, what you want to do is test the client and their policies, right, and provide value to the company. So what does that mean? And one thing I do want to point out too, let me ask of the audience, how many people here are security consultants or practitioners, vendor focused? 1, 2, Stephen, 3, 4. And then how many folks are internal security folks? Okay. So I guess as I'm going through this talk, I'm sharing the methodology and the process for the purpose of if you have to deliver these types of engagements. But I would also encourage you, if you're an internal individual, to use this as a gauge for assessing any vendors that you call in to do social engineering. So these are some of the core components that will differentiate whether or not they're executing in a professional manner. So what does it mean? What I described earlier, you want to make sure through this process that you have very clearly defined goals and objectives, very specific, and I'll get into a little bit more detail later on what that actually means. You want to be able to illustrate your approach and your plan to the client prior to beginning. Even your initial very first discussion, you want to be able to clearly outline the steps that you would take or the phased approach that you would take. Data collection and organization is an extremely important piece of delivering these types of engagements, and it's the most challenging. That's why I call it the social engineering hangover, because at the end of the day, you have all of this information and data, and it can be, difficult to manage. And then you have to actually present your findings in a manner that can be consumed by the C-levels and the end users. So it's important to note that at the end of the day, your findings and recommendations, they really are going to be targeted towards the non-IT and non-security folks. So you have to sort of keep that in your mind while you're developing your presentation. So this is my go-to what's wrong with security guy. He's my poster child. So this is kind of, he's saying, dude, I just dropped a USB in their parking lot and I got total admin rights. Now he's off drinking beer, right? And then his finding is, you suck and your employees suck and I win. I won the contest. And his recommendation is don't click shit and don't be dumb. Like, thanks, that was really helpful. I'll just let you guys read what I think about that. It frustrates me. And this is kind of a situation that inspired me to write this talk. So as we go through this, I want to, if we can, make this as collaborative as possible so that we can sort of have a case study. And as we're going through the talks, I want to apply it to a very specific type scenario. So this scenario that we're going to start with, it's a mid-size manufacturing client. I swear to God, Stephen and I did not plan this. Mid-size manufacturing client, about 5,000 employees. They have multiple physical locations. Testing will be in scope for corporate location and one plant. And this is one phase of an enterprise assessment. All right, so I'm going to open this up to you guys. Let me ask you, what do you think we need to know? When we start a social engineering engagement, what types of questions do we need to ask?
What can we not do?
All right, good. What can we not do?
What methods of communication, either email, phone calls, other types of distribution to the employees to try to interact?
Good, good. What are the communication methods? Anyone else?
It might be obvious, but I want to know what kind of data is sensitive to the company. So if we got this, what are your crown jewels?
Yep.
You said manufacturing, maybe that's next year's manufacturing plans or something.
Exactly. Goals.
Oh, and I also want to know if there's certain individuals that we're not allowed to contact. So are we allowed to send the CEO or issue email?
Yep. Restraints are very important.
Yes.
Why do you want an assessment?
Exactly. And I'm going to start flipping through the slides, but that's the number one question. That's the place to start. Why do you want to do this? And it's extremely important to understand the driver and the individual that's driving it. Because that individual, regardless, you're likely interfacing with a security administrator or security manager or maybe the CISO or director of security. It's very important to understand if it's driven by the C-levels or if it's driven by the security organization, because to some degree, you may actually have to manage the security organization, right? So, it's important to understand, is it driven by compliance? So a lot of online banks require pre-texting. There's not a whole lot of other compliance requirements that require social engineering, but is it because of an incident? Did something actually happen and suddenly this, has become a problem? Or is it, of course, some type of CNN type driver, some executive read the back of an airline magazine or something like that. So the second thing, so now we understand, okay, in this particular case study, let's say that, I'll actually get to that in a second. But the second question we need to understand is, do you have a policy? Right? What are your existing policies? Because we really should be testing something very specific, which would be specific policies and procedures. Do you have an awareness program? Are your end users pretty aware of information security? Have they ever been trained? How often are they trained? What's the content of the training? Really getting a good feel for whether you believe it's going to be free reign with the end users, or if they have at least a degree of what to and what not to allow. And then what are your technical controls? What are the technical controls that you have in place? Do you have phishing, phishing and spam protection? Do you require SSL on your public website, DLP, USB controls, anti-malware, things like that? Now, all of this sort of gives you a good understanding of the technical and culture and the maturity level of that company. So usually when you're having this initial conversation, you find out a lot of information that tells you a lot about the company. Oh, and then the other question is this going to be blind or informed? So are you going to give me some information that I can use, or am I walking into each of these locations blind with no information and then gathering what I can publicly? So here's the answers that we got. So we asked all these questions, and this is all occurring via kickoff call, right? So this is about a 1-hour call where you ask these questions and get this information. So the answers in this particular case study is, we need to do it. I know it's a problem, and this is a senior security manager. They've had a few incidents in the past, and this is at the direction of senior management that they want to improve their existing policies and procedures. Do they have a policy? Yes, they've had a policy in place for about 2 years. It is about 50 pages. It contains technical policies as well as end-user-based policies. Next question, awareness program. Yes, well, yeah, no, yes, kind of, yeah, we do. Well, sort of. All right, hold on a second here. And this, I don't know why, but almost every single solitary client I talk to, they fall down on this answer and they stumble over their words. I think they're a little bit embarrassed, but, so you have to drill into that a little bit more. Okay, do you have annual awareness training that's delivered via CBT or on-site, physical delivery? No, okay. Do you do training at new hire? Yeah, we provide the AUP, and HR trains against the AUP. The AUP, okay, is this AUP different than the policy you just explained? No, it's all in the same policy. Okay, so what you're saying is HR is training on the 50-page policy at new hire. Correct. All right, good. I'm crystal clear. I understand exactly what's going on here. So the next answers we got in regards to technical controls is spam, phishing. Of course, we have that degree of protection. We've had some tools in place for quite a while. No, we don't use SSL by default on our public website. No, we don't really have two-factor for our OWA or Citrix environment, but we're probably going to do that sometime. Active Directory is exposed to the internet via the Citrix servers. There's no USB or DLP controls. And in fact, now they start really dishing out a lot more information that you didn't even ask. They've had malware issues in the past. The end users have admin rights. They don't really control the software that's deployed. Certainly end users have disabled AV for one reason or another. And they do not have web content filtering. So these are kind of the answers that we got about this organization. So tell me, what do you think this organization's profile is? So it's a mid-size manufacturing company, 5,000 employees, and 5,000 employees in multiple locations. So what do you think the maturity level of this organization is? Okay. 2 out of 5, right? Why is the maturity level important when you're talking about social engineering?
Processes aren't in place. Or they are or they aren't.
Exactly. And so now as you're going into this, what are you going to test?
Well, you're going to test how easy it is to circumvent processes or to find exceptions to processes.
Yep. Now, so the maturity level, they're immature. Where do they need to improve? Probably everywhere, right? Which areas are so easy that it would not even make sense to test, right? So these are kind of the questions you have to ask yourself. Because don't forget, so I didn't mention this, we're in the scoping phase of this engagement, right? So everything you do costs money. So you have to make sure you can do it within a budget, and you have to make sure you're delivering value for those dollars spent. So, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, which areas do they need to likely improve the most? And how can I execute this testing in the areas that would apply to them? So with the given that there's 2 aspects of social engineering. There's physical social engineering and there is technical social engineering. Now based on this, what do you think we should start with, and where do you think that we should begin our testing or focus on for this particular engagement?
I'll honestly go both ways.
Both?
Yeah.
How deep do you think we should go with both of them? Meaning?
Fundamental, I think.
Fundamental.
Yeah. Basic,
Yep.
It doesn't seem like we're gonna be able to test a whole lot of the technical controls since those don't exist.
Good point.
In absence of those, we should probably be testing processes and people.
Good.
Ultimately, they're gonna be the ones who are gonna
You guys are writing this for me.
succeed.
Yep. And that's exactly what, here's the other question. What shouldn't we do? Now, this is a client's money, right? So that's kind of what we're thinking about. So here's me, the happy little consultant. You know, as a pen tester, you sit there and you think, oh, this is going to be so much fun. I will, with all the lack of controls, there's 10 different ways that I can get in, and I'm just going to smoke you. My opinion is that there's no value in that. I already know it's going to be so completely easy from a technical standpoint. Phishing, USBs, you know, I know there's no question in my mind how easy it will be. So what I sort of decided, no technical testing unless there's some very specific areas that they want to understand how at risk they are, and they need, you know, some degree of evidence to champion some solution or budget or something like that. Other than that, my recommendation to the client is, listen, put some controls in place, and then we can test them technically. You know, we need to go through some degree of improvement here, but I don't really need to do testing to know that, you know, we can execute a successful phishing attempt against your end users. So we decided some basic physical and remote testing, and remote being just phone and reconnaissance and things like that. And like you said, I'm sorry, what's your name? You, sir, yeah. Derek. Like you said, Derek, fundamental level of testing. So this engagement, the purpose of it is not to prove how smart I am, right? It's for the purpose of testing your people and your end users. So as I'm developing my shtick, I'm going to give the end users or whoever I'm testing, I'm going to give them some pretty obvious ways to catch me and turn me down, right? I'm going to give them some opportunities. I'm not going to go in all sneaky and tricky because, you know, that's kind of not really what I'm there to do. It's not to prove how smart or tricky I am.
Well, by doing that, aren't you reducing the effectiveness of your test?
It's a good, it is, exactly. So for example, and I have some of these examples later on, but you had mentioned, Stephen, that you approach the organization as an IT consultant, right? So somebody says, what are you doing here? And you say, I'm an IT consultant, I'm here to test wireless.
Right.
I say, I'm with IT, I'm checking the systems.
Okay.
And they're like, IT who? What systems? And I'm like, the ones over there, or there. And they're like, what? Oh, all right, well, just go. Okay. Now, if they keep probing me, I'm here, the systems that are connected to the network, I'm here to test wireless. I'll provide that more detailed, but I start off with very vague.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm referring to. And so you have to also balance, when you give some obvious opportunities to get caught, you can impact your testing, right? So your whole gig can be up if you make a mistake and somebody catches you. So you have to just sort of balance between the validity of the test, as Stephen mentioned, giving them the opportunity to catch you, and then, maintaining the ability to continue testing. So we've gathered all of this information. So with the pre-project call, so now we're at the point in the kickoff call that we want to start gathering additional details, right? So first thing we want to ask is, what are the targets? So the client may not know what their targets should be. My experience is, for the most part, is these are organizations that are going through this the very first time. So for the purpose of our case study, this is the first time they're going through this assessment. They don't really know what their targets are. So you have to sort of guide them through picking the targets, whether it be physical locations, people, or particular data sets. And also service offerings, right? So they may have a help desk or this or that they may want tested. So the next thing, as you're going through this also, clients don't really know what to expect. So I don't recommend starting the conversation with asking, okay, what can't I do? What you're going to want to do is illustrate to them what your typical plan and approach is. Give them some good idea about what you're going to be doing. And from there, then they'll get a better idea of what you're going to be doing, and they can demonstrate some, or share some of the restraints with you. But let them know, okay, first we're going to do reconnaissance. We're going to make some phone calls, get some information about your environment. Next, we're going to visit the physical sites after hours and see what type of access we can grant, or gain access to, or even execute some of the testing. We'll do some probing. But they do have to understand, these plans are not set in stone. It's a very fluid process. You don't really know what's going to happen, or what opportunities might present themselves to you as you're doing the testing. So it is a fluid process, but giving them a very clear idea of what your plan is will help them sort of give you the information that you need. So I think I talked about restraints. At the close, I would recommend saving this for later in the conversation. Ask them about locations, hours, people, approaches, any type of impersonation that you plan on executing. For example, is it off limits for me to impersonate an IT person, an employee? Do you have anything to add to that, Stephen?
Law enforcement is a big one. So a lot of engagements that I've been to have said, well, it's okay for you to have a pretext as a employee guard, but not as an actual police person, because they're entering into legal issues.
Yeah, and that is against the law to impersonate. So some of these things, that does go without saying, right?
But the biggest area where a lot of my colleagues have crossed into is the utilization of people's property.
Yes.
So one of my colleagues was doing a contract with a financial firm, and there he actually was given permission to steal people's cars.
And I've had situations like that.
So he actually kidnapped a vice president and held them at his home until the vice president called the number, and that was all authorized.
Wow, that's pretty far. I personally probably wouldn't. And that's something to think about. That's something that you do have to consider as you're going through this. The personal aspects of it are very important in understanding how far you can go. The biggest, I don't recommend even delving into or touching anything associated with end users at all. There's just no need for that. Executives are a different story, right? So I've had situations where I've driven to the executive's house and taken a picture. Now, whether or not I use that and put that into the deliverable, you want to clear with your client, because you're talking about people's families and lives and things. So that's definitely an important piece of it. The other thing, too, something to keep in mind is ask about any guards or security monitoring, security alerting, physical. I've done a lot of engagements for state agencies, and most of them are, there's guys with guns that respond if the alarms go off, and we came pretty close to that actually happening. So it's important to note. What had happened was we were in this location, and we had found a bunch of codes for the physical security system. And for whatever reason, my partner in crime didn't enter it properly, and the alarms went off, and they're supposed to be there they will be there with guns drawn within 3 minutes. So we just got the hell out of there. All right, so the other thing in the kickoff call is get out of jail free card. This one's kind of obvious. You can get a basic language. You might want to have it signed by an officer of the company. Any ideas why? So here's just a little picture for you. This is a picture, this is a real story. The CFO escorting me into a conference room saying, sit right here, don't move while I notify the authorities. It was the only time, only once, and every single time I've done this have I ever had to dish out my get out of jail free card. I can always get out of it. I get out of it. I have a million different ways to get out of things, but this was the first time I really, really, really got caught. He was not happy. He wasn't happy because he didn't know about this test. I was in his office space. I was, rifling through his employees' files and things like that. I was a CFO, and I was busted in a bad way. And even the questions he asked me, I'm like, oh, I'm here, IT systems, whatever. And he's like, why do you have papers in your hand? Just what? And I'm like, well, and I still did pretty well, but he was just not happy. So I actually did, just, in the interest of following best practice, I contacted a lawyer, and I'm like, just riddle me this. Are there scenarios by which I'm legally responsible for anything that occurs during these, tests? And he said, absolutely, you're legally responsible. Everything you do. So, as long as he said, you're authorized to test, nobody's likely going to take it that far. But I did want to understand what the potential impact could be. And so he did recommend that you get it signed by an officer of the company, because if you have it signed by, say, a security manager, and the security manager is out to get other people in the company, nobody knows about this, and he didn't get the proper approval from the C-levels, that can be uncomfortable.
You get denied that he's giving you that access.
No, because you have paperwork, right? So you have an official signature on the engagement on the proposal. And you have master service agreements that kind of protect you and the company. So there's no, plausible deniability. But it's just whether or not, just make sure that that person get a comfort level that they're authorized to authorize you.
With this company and its level of maturity as far as their program, were there any specific flags that were set up to go after, or was it more of an open-ended?
So the client didn't know. So the client doesn't know. You're talking about the targets?
Were there specific targets that you were going to be looking for as a criteria for success? Or was it more open-ended to see what you could get?
They had very specific, so the policies and procedures, as you're doing this, you're testing the policies, procedures, and practices. So that's what I test very specifically. And in this particular case, I was testing tailgating, gaining access. So in this particular case, what I did is at about 4:55, tailgated my way into the organization. And then from there, you gather the data of what you find for the purpose of providing evidence of impact, right? Because it's just the way it is. It has to be a compelling event in order for them to take it seriously. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, so at this point, getting back to our case study, so we know we have this manufacturing client. We've got one corporate and one physical, one plant that we're going to execute some basic fundamental physical testing against. Really, there's some policies and procedures, but not a whole lot. So you don't have anything very specific to work with. So it's kind of up to you what you think. Did we just lose the mic? No? Mic check, yeah. So that's what we know. Now, okay, so we're not going to do any technical testing unless, maybe we'll do some degree. But now we actually have to start doing this, right? So this is a process in the preparation process. Now, in Stephen's example, he had 6 hours to do prep. I recommend at least a minimum of a week. And because 1 week, because you can't necessarily make all the phone calls you need to make and probe the organization in a 24-hour time period. So you can't call a help desk 20 times trying to get information within an hour. You need to spread this out. So as much time as you can allow, 1 to 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, depending on the scope of it, will help you. So the next part of the project prep is to create your log templates. So just get an Excel spreadsheet, organize each of the logs by the physical location and the phase of the approach. So it would be, corporate physical testing. Make sure that you include, date, time, phone number, location, person name, and notes. So that's the very, very first thing you start with before you do any other sort of reconnaissance or anything else. So the next step is figure out your shtick, right? So we have a mid-sized manufacturing company. What do you think is a good little ruse to use as you're visiting these locations? Any ideas? I have two go-tos. Oh, sorry. Vendor, yep. Exactly. I have two go-tos. I barely ever deviate. I remotely or sometimes locally, I'm a systems person, IT support, something like that. I customize the words, depending on the organization. The other one is the fire suppression vendor. So, safety and things like that. That's just really easy. And that's what I would plan for this particular environment is to, be the fire suppression vendor. I'm coming in to count and check the fire extinguishers and sprinklers. So tell me, how well do you think this will work for a manufacturing company? Any thoughts? Good?
Yeah, because I can tell you from working in a manufacturing facility for years, that if a person came and appeared to be from the fire department, local fire department, to come in and count the fire extinguishers and all that, they just walked right in, nobody even questioned them ever.
Yeah, that's been my experience usually. The only thing possibly is it's a manufacturing company, so safety first, right? They might be really, really, really into safety, and they might really, really know what actually occurs to, for this type of protection. They might know that, no, we don't do this, we do that, we don't do that. So that's the only risk about it, but I'm gonna keep using that until it doesn't work anymore. So the other thing, if that doesn't work, like Stephen had illustrated, you can just do a reconnaissance, call up, find out, what vendor would work, call the organization, just cold call them and say, can you tell me who's responsible for your recycling? Or, pick anything. Anything will work, but definitely spend the time to call the organization and act as a salesperson and understand if they have existing processes. Maybe go find a sales pitch from that vendor and execute that sales pitch to gather information. Ask them how often they've checked their fire extinguishers or whatever. You need to do some degree of validation that your shtick will work. Don't make it up. Make sure that you test it to some degree with the clients. As you're in the preparation phase, it's very easy to forget to log things. I'm going to say this 100 times through. Make sure you log everything. As you're doing reconnaissance, log that you called on this date, this time, with this ruse, based on this vendor, etc. If you gather information from LinkedIn or Facebook or anywhere else, Maltego, take screenshots during that time and put them in a document. Make sure you keep all your logs, but try to keep your screenshots in a single type of document based on the phase. So initially your screenshot will be preparation or reconnaissance or whatever it is.
A log is particularly important during the engagement because if something else happens that's coincidental, like a criminal event or a physical event, say a fire, you need to prove that it wasn't you who caused it.
So, and the other thing too is at the close of the project, you will be asked very detailed questions. So, if there's a scenario where a security guard didn't do their job, they want to know the precise time that you were there. People get fired over this stuff. In general, I try to avoid giving names. I kind of pretend like I don't have them, because I don't want people to get fired. I feel bad. But it's obviously, as you're going along, they will ask you very detailed questions and expect you to be able to produce that information on the spot. So the next thing is prepare your toolkit, right? So you'll need putty knife, duct tape, screwdriver, lots of extra badges. If you can, prior to executing, figure out what kind of badge system they have, if there's pictures, this, that, the other, and just go to Kinko's and make one. But you know, if you start social engineering all the time, it just becomes part of your normal life, and then you end up collecting a whole bunch of badges because you know you can use them later. Clipboard. Everybody looks important with a clipboard. Make sure you carry one. It's very true. You can go get miscellaneous items from an Army surplus store. You can get some type of official-looking badges and things like that. I stay away from that, again, because it might give the appearance that you're impersonating law enforcement. But you can get like good security guard type stuff. Bring lots of rubber gloves. Lots and lots and lots. Keep them in, stash them everywhere. And I'll tell you why that's important a little bit later. Plan your outfits. For me in particular, going back to why I choose to be a fire safety individual is because then I can wear khakis, hiking boots, t-shirt, and a windbreaker. Normally, I don't leave my house without heels, right? So for me, it's a very uncomfortable place to figure out how to execute in something and just not wear heels. But if I wore something like this, I'm gonna kill myself. So whatever your shtick is, make sure, and guys, maybe it's not applicable to you, but it is to me. I dress very differently for a professional environment than I do social engineering. And I just had a case recently where I was doing work at a law firm. So I wore a suit, right? So I always wanted to look like a lawyer. So as you're doing this, you're gonna be, there was one time where I just drove in straight from the airport right to the client site, and I was wearing heels and my bags and this, that, the other. And I was just doing a little reconnaissance, and I ended up climbing up like 7 flights of a fire escape in heels. I was about to kill myself. So you just have to be prepared. You know, physically, there's no limit to what you might be doing. You might be climbing up over through ceiling panels and things like that. The other thing for preparation is to prepare your vulnerability assessment toolkit. So it has some tools where you can technically break in on you. Nothing extravagant, just at least some degree of testing. Or, I'm sorry, some degree of a assessment toolkit. And the biggest part is put your game face on, right? So put your game face on, be prepared for anything, and then test your story on your friends, your family, your loved ones, whoever will listen. Go through it a couple times because you will be probed, and it's very important to obviously be able to answer quickly and you know, in a very confident manner. So one of the things, what I do just to kind of keep my skills honed is I just social engineer all the time. So for example, the hotel here, I just asked the security guard downstairs, I'm like, do you guys require keys for all of your rooms? Or is it just the penthouse? You know, because I was in the higher floors. And he said, why do you need to know that? I was like, I don't, just curious. And then he ended up telling me. Same thing, we went to Arlington Racetrack, and these poor IT dudes were running around fixing all the betting machines. And I just got all the information I needed from them just through hanging out at the racetrack. They were all thought I was cool because I was in security. So at this point, okay, now we actually have to go do this, right? So where do we start? What, you know, there's a lot to do here. Where do we begin? I'd recommend, yes, got it, oh, got it. I would recommend starting with reconnaissance in the evening, later in the evening, not 5:05. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped this. So where do we start? We have to figure out the goals and the objectives, right? That's the most important part. Ideally, what your goals are to test specific policies and procedures, obtain physical access, locate sensitive data for evidence, retain access. You know, that's what the duct tape's for and the putty knife, so that you can slim jim and then duct tape the the door, lock, and don't get caught. So ultimately, that's what we're doing for every site that we visit. So start with reconnaissance. In the later evenings, just make note of any activity, comings and goings, cleaning crew, etc. Find the dumpsters. You can usually, it's just easier to do that kind of dumpster diving in the dark when people don't see you and wonder what you're doing. And then as you're doing this initial reconnaissance, if you see an opportunity, take it. Every opportunity that comes up, you will likely only get it once. You're going to want to plan several visits to each location. Execute methodically. So make sure that you're not sort of all over the place. Maintain a consistent approach to each of the locations. So if you're walking in with your ruse as the fire vendor, just try to follow the same process as much as you can. Be prepared for anything. Again, you never know when an opportunity will come up. If physical access is obtained or to the network, try to get admin rights, but do it very quickly. Nothing is more telling than some stranger sitting plugged into some random network jack, you know, running an assessment toolkit for like 2 hours. Try to get, you know, admin rights in like, I don't know, 7 minutes or something like that. Log everything. Make sure you log every single solitary thing and be polite. Leave things intact. Don't do any damage. Don't let people know that you've been ruffling through their desk. It's just not polite. So here's a couple just examples. I'm going to go through these pretty quick, but this is kind of like how it actually goes. I was at a hospital and I was targeting the executive offices, and I walked up and the cleaning guy looked at me and said, "Oh my God, I've been looking at pictures of you for 10 years. And I'm like, I have no idea what's happening here. And I'm like, great. And he's like, do you know where you're going? And I'm like, that way? And he's like, yep, right down the hall. You know where it is. And I'm like, I have no freaking idea. He thought I was the executive's daughter. So who would have thought? I mean, you don't really know what's going to happen. Oh, okay, so this is a good one. Again, this was a hospital, I think, and I got busted in a bad way from a security guard. We were in a place we should not have been. There's absolutely no possible way that any public person should be making their way to this location. And the security guard followed us downstairs. We're running down the stairs, and finally we got to the end, and we just like hid behind the stairwell. And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, and I had nothing. I mean, I had nothing. So I just cried. Seriously, if you have nothing else, sorry guys, but it works for me. And I'm like, I just need a minute, please. And she's like, all right, get out of here. Take your minute somewhere else. This was another funny story. I was on the floor of an exchange in Chicago, a trading exchange. I have all these papers. I'm like ruffling around. It's like 8 o'clock at night. The exchange is closed. Nobody's around. And the security guard's like, what's up? How you doing? And I'm like, are you kidding me? So I'm standing here talking to him like this. I've got stuff hidden behind my back. And he's just like, oh, so you're in support IT, yeah? How do you like it? And I'm like, I can't believe I'm sitting here and this guy is like being social with me. Well, you should be telling me to get the hell out. So here's a couple other quick examples. This one, no, I seriously was hiding. This was a state agency. I was hiding behind a file cabinet, and it turned out the state treasurer was coming and going. It was after hours, but somebody kept coming and going while I was digging through, and it was a small area, but I did it. So be prepared for anything. This was a good little scenario. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's actually a roach here. I was digging through the recycling, and the lights were off. I was hiding in the closet, and I'm just digging. I found some great stuff. And then the bank closed, and everyone left. I open the closet, and I look, and there in the bin I'm digging in is like this big old dead roach. It's disgusting. Bring gloves everywhere. All right, so I'm going to move on to reporting now. So we finished the testing, right? So we showed, as you saw in the last couple examples, you have no idea where this is going to go. So remember I talked about logging everything? Log everything, log everything. Well, guess what? Do you think I logged everything? Probably not, because I was hiding behind a file cabinet. It's kind of hard to take notes. It's very difficult when you're executing to actually log everything. If you can, keep a voice recorder. But at this point, okay, I've penetrated 10 million different ways. I've got tons of pictures. I've got, a lot of different paths that I took to get in, all these different things. I've got all of this information. I may or may not have downloaded and organized all my pictures every night. I'm pretty sure I didn't get that security guard's name. So at this point, I just have a huge hangover, and I'm like, it's probably easier just to not get off the couch. But it's not that bad. It's really not. So what I do is you start writing up the anatomy of an attack, and that sort of gets your mind working, and you outline in the reporting section, okay, this was step 1, this was step 2. Just tell your story. As you're telling your story, then you can piece together all of your evidence and your data and get it organized, and it'll just get your head in the game. And then I create my deliverables based on ISO. So every single solitary finding I have is based on some type of a published industry standard. I'm not just making stuff up saying you should teach your end users. It's all very structured and organized and professional. So here's what it looks like. I don't know how well you guys can see, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like. Secure areas, ISO 27002 with a description of that section. I talk about the assessment methodology. And then under the typical targets, I would actually list the findings. And then this is what the anatomy of an attack looks like. Just kind of, you'll outline it step by step. There's really no way to avoid using a lot of words. But when you're taking pictures, this is why it's very important to take pictures every single solitary step of the way so that you can outline the anatomy of an attack. This is another one where I actually gained access to the IT systems building. And I was able to, I told them I was testing wireless. I was able to just hurry up, plug in, sniff the traffic, get their domain, just do some quick information gathering on the domain, gather all the servers, ran a quick test to see intruder lockout. Intruder lockout was set to 5. Sweet, I just did, a password test on 2 or 3 different, blank or default or something like that, and I was able to get domain admin rights. But that was like 5 minutes. That's how much time I spent doing that. All right. And that's me. And this is just for the record, my mock InfoSec jobs link that I just added real quick, Len. Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Thoughts? How many people actually in the room are hoping to at some point in the future do social engineering? Authorized for money, not. Yeah. Okay. So let me, have you actually done them before? I have not. So did you find this helpful? Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's really cool. I'm a student still right now, and so I don't have any professional experience in social engineering, but it's something I've been reading a lot about, studying lately. It's something that I want to seriously get into. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, but it is a lot of work. And one thing I just want to stress very strongly, if you don't stay organized and collect data every single step of the way, you can get yourself into trouble and have some difficulty actually presenting the findings.
This just interesting so I can train my users.
That's true. I have a lot more to say. I could probably write a book on this. But I had more slides on how to present the material, how to actually deliver the findings to the same people that you looked in the eye and tricked. It's very difficult and challenging. So maybe I'll do that for my next one. Sure.
How many people do you usually work with per company?
With any consulting engagement, usually we try 2. It depends on the scenario, the scoping and things like that. I've done them by myself, and that's fine, but it's a little bit harder. You know, it's much better to have a team, but usually 2. I've never done it with more than 2. Although that's not true. I did do pre-texting in a room with the client where there was 5 of the client and 1 of me. That was fun. Yes?
I apologize if I missed this earlier in the talk. How did you build your personal library of those relevant ISO standards?
Well, ISO, I just did the work. So ISO you have to pay for. I just went and looked everything up that would apply to social engineering and physical security. And then initially, sometimes with these engagements, we would do a physical security check, and somebody else had a physical checklist of things to look at. But I just did it. I don't know what to say. I read. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, thank you, guys.